Check, 1, 2. I just put that together. Check, 1, 2. Check, check.
We're just trying to resolve a sound issue, then we'll get started. You think we should just start? Okay.
Check, 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 check.
Okay, it's working? Yep, okay, good. We can get started. Sorry for the delay. We do have one panelist who did tell me he'd be arriving a little late, but we can get started. We probably need to wrap up actually by about 5:15 because a couple of our guests have to leave at that time. My name is Karen Pennar, and I'm co-director of the Center for Community and Ethnic Media here at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. I'm joined by our other co-director, Jahangir Khattak, who many of you know. And we thought it would be important, in light of the election results, to bring together a panel of experts on the subject of immigrant rights and protections, a topic of great interest to the community and ethnic media, and of course to your readers, listeners, and viewers. New York is, after all, at the epicenter of this issue. As you know, New York City is home to more than 3 million foreign-born individuals, about 500,000 of whom are undocumented. How those immigrants, and immigrants across the nation, young and old, working class and professional, recently arrived and longtime residents, how those immigrants are treated, what their rights are, how they can be protected, is a subject of increasing concern. We're hoping that the legal experts on this panel will help to illuminate this topic for us. While we cannot predict what will happen in coming months, we can perhaps be prepared with expert knowledge. Every member of the panel is a lawyer with extensive experience working in the immigrant rights sphere, and we're very grateful that all of you agreed to appear here and on such short notice. I'm going to give some bios, and then I'm going to ask each panelist to speak for a few minutes. I'm going to follow up with a couple of questions, then we'll open it up. Speaking first will be Nisha Agarwal, Commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. As Commissioner, Nisha has led the development and implementation of ID NYC, the city's municipal ID program, the most successful one in the nation thus far. She also has been behind the introduction this year of Access New York, which provides free legal assistance to immigrant New Yorkers. A lawyer by training, Nisha worked to establish the Immigrant Justice Corps, a fellowship program that helps immigrants seeking citizenship and fighting deportation. To her left, we have Camille Mackler, Director of Legal Initiatives for the New York Immigration Coalition, where she works with coalition members and a variety of stakeholders on issues relating to immigration law in New York. Before joining the NYIC in 2013, Camille worked in private practice representing immigrants before U.S. immigration courts and federal courts of appeals. To her left is Alizabeth Newman, clinical professor at the CUNY School of Law and director of the Community Legal Resource Network at CUNY School of Law. Alizabeth has long advocated for the rights of immigrants and has been active in educating legal and immigrant communities on immigration law with an emphasis on the unique protections for battered immigrant women. She was the founder and initial director of Sepa Mujer, a community-based organization offering Latina immigrant women legal rights education. Alina, to her left, is an associate professor of clinical law and supervising attorney at New York University School of Law. Alina is co-director of the Immigrant Rights Clinic. She and her students represent immigrants and community organizations in litigation at the agency, federal court, and Supreme Court level. Alina also engages in scholarship on deportation and detention issues, particularly at the intersection of immigration and criminal law. Now, I'd like to ask Nisha to take a few minutes to tell us what her agency and the city are planning in terms of protecting immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants in the future. New York calls itself a sanctuary city. How will the city ensure that it remains so? How do you go up against federal authority or the federal government if, for instance, a registry is instituted or extensive surveillance is undertaken? What do you do if deportations pick up? Nisha?
Great. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. Thank you so much for having me here this afternoon. And to answer your question, so I think all of you in the room know that the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs is essentially a bridge between New York City's many diverse immigrant communities and city government. And I think the first step that we've taken since the election is very important, which is providing information to New Yorkers, to immigrant New Yorkers, about the resources and services that are still available to them and that will continue to be available to them even as we head into a new presidential administration. There is a lot of fear that we have heard. There are a lot of concerns that community members have, and we think it's our obligation as a city to ensure that we are continuing to provide information that the city is still a safe place for immigrant New Yorkers. So the first thing I'd like to do is actually draw your attention to this fact sheet, which my colleague Vita has in the back as well. And I encourage you all, this is a fact sheet from the Mayor's Office and from the City Council outlining the resources for New York City immigrants and the many protections and services that they have available. These range from things like ID NYC to obviously education and healthcare to also things like legal services and being able to call to schedule appointments to get legal services, since that's something that many immigrants will have questions about in the coming weeks and months. A need that was very large before will continue to be significant now. So that's one of the first steps that we've taken, and we're now starting to think about the future. As you had mentioned, Karen, that we have to wait to see what this next administration brings into place. But what we can do as a city is strengthen our resolve to defend the many victories and programs that we have in place. So this morning, the mayor gave a public address and said that if the federal government decides to impose a registry of Muslims, that we would fight back legally and we would use those tools. That if we see the federal government trying to tear apart immigrant families, that we will provide those families who need it with lawyers to be able to help defend themselves. So we have a number of tools at our disposal, from the law to our budget and to the programs that we provide to try to stop any negative federal government activity that may come in the future. That said, this will not be an easy effort, and we will need to partner with folks in the community, with legal services partners, really welcoming a range of new ideas and good ideas of ways in which the city can be helpful to remain a place that's welcoming and is really built by immigrant families.
Thank you, Nisha. Camille, your work at the New York Immigration Coalition has focused a lot on ensuring the avoidance of immigrant services fraud at a time when fears and worries are elevated in many immigrant communities and expert legal advice may be in short supply. Can you talk a bit about the risk of both unskilled and fraudulent service providers filling the void?
Yes, so as Commissioner Agarwal just mentioned, we're really focusing, I think, as a large community as a whole in connecting immigrants to trustworthy legal services. And one of the biggest risks is that unscrupulous providers are going to sort of try to prey on the fears that individuals have right now and try to gain personal profit out of it. Just this morning, I was speaking to someone who was telling me the story of a young man who was afraid that he was going to be deported in the new administration and consulted with a lawyer who told him he should apply for DACA right away and charged him $9,000. So we know that it's happening. People are preying on these fears right now. And we also are concerned that individuals who aren't properly trained, who aren't licensed to practice law, are going to be trying to fill a gap in what they perceive as a gap in their communities in terms of getting people to proper services. So we're lucky in New York City, we have a lot of resources, and we also have a lot of different players who are willing to come together and try to figure out how to make sure that we're getting services as deep into the communities as possible. We have Action NYC, which Commissioner Agarwal mentioned. We have a lot of other city-funded initiatives. We have a very large, complex network of legal service providers, and we're all sort of focusing on getting the services out there. Outside of New York City, it's a bit of a different story. Areas are very underserved. A lot of the rural areas, immigrants are even more fearful of coming forward because of discrimination, and we've really seen an uptick in hate and bias crimes and other sort of discrimination happening. We've seen it happening in the schools, we've seen it happening on the street, on public transit, on social media, and it sort of goes hand in hand with the fear that immigrants have in reaching out for help. So we're going to be doing everything we can to make sure they know in New York City, again, we're lucky we have very welcoming resources, and over the last few years, the steps that Mayor de Blasio's administration have taken have really sort of helped bridge that divide between immigrant communities and government. Outside of New York City, not so much, and that's something we're going to be focusing on. But we're very nervous that fraudulent filings, which have always been a problem because there's no remedies for once you have a fraudulent application on file with immigration authorities, there are very few remedies, none written in the law. Lawyers have to get creative to sort of use what exists, such as U visas, to try to get remedies for people. But we're very afraid that anybody who commits fraud, even if it's unwillingly done, or unknowingly done rather, will be subject to harsher punishments under the new administration. We're also concerned that a lot of people are going to be filing asylum applications. Asylum applications are a great favorite of fraudulent providers, and now we're a little concerned that more than ever, individuals are going to be using that recourse to try to get some status in the U.S. And of course, if you file a fake asylum application, you're barred forever from receiving an immigrant benefit. So at some point, the truth comes to light. So we're just going to be working with the Protecting Immigrant New Yorkers Task Force, which includes our local government, but separately on other efforts to get legal services out there, with the district attorneys, the attorney general, and all of our Piney task force members to make sure that immigrants don't fall victim to that, because the consequences will be devastating.
Thank you, Camille. Elizabeth, there's a possibility that the original 2012 executive order on deferred action for childhood arrivals could be reversed. Can you talk to us a bit about the situation for people who may not yet have applied, even if they were eligible, or for people who may have maybe up for renewal now, and other circumstances around DACA?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the first thing that I'll distinguish is why DACA is more vulnerable than other potential relief for people, specifically because DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was done as an executive order. So it's at the pleasure of the executive, and it really just takes, another executive order to undo that. Unlike other immigration laws, I know that in the community there's been just a lot of panic. People have been saying, oh, I'm not going to file that family petition, or I'm not going to naturalize because I'm scared. Well, other parts of the law have been settled in Congress and would take a congressional act to change, but not DACA. So it is possible that when the president-elect comes into office, he could easily do an executive order to renege on DACA, and that would leave people. Well, there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, that's the first thing that we have to say is we're guessing, right? That nobody has a crystal ball. So, the least that could happen is that nothing happens. That people have work authorization and it expires, and that's it. There's no renewals. Another thing that could happen is it could be invalidated as of the day that the order is reneged, I'll say. Or what people are most fearful of is that the information that has already been collected on DACA recipients will then be passed on to the enforcement branch and proceedings would begin. We don't know. What we do know is that the regulations that were put in place under the Obama administration with DACA as it was said that information would not be passed to enforcement unless there's very specific circumstances of serious crimes or issues of national security or terrorism. But all of that was under an executive order that's at the pleasure of the executive, and the executive is changing. So we don't know. What we can say is that people who are already in the system are already at risk, and I don't think there's any harm in renewing applications, because who knows? It could take the executive a while to make a decision, or we don't know. So somebody wouldn't be more at risk by renewing. For those who haven't yet registered but are eligible, that is, that's a call that they would have to make. The candidate, Trump, had made clear that he would want to discontinue this program. So it would be putting somebody at risk who's undocumented and unknown to the government to make themselves known to the government, and all of the history that's needed to register for DACA. But there are also people who feel that we don't know. There could be some political solution in the end that split the difference, that, okay, maybe the kids who have DACA now might, sometimes there's political fixes for groups of people that we don't know how to proceed with. So there are some people that might want to, not for $9,000, of course, but if somebody is thinking about that, the recommendation would be to sit down very, very carefully with an attorney to go over every little inch of that person's history, immigration and otherwise, to make sure that they're not somebody who is particularly at risk and should not be, making that decision. Yeah, so I guess I'll stop there.
Okay. Alina, you have done extensive work at the intersection of both immigration law and criminal law with the suggestion that a Trump administration might move initially against the undocumented with a criminal record, who they say number about 3 million of the estimated 11 million undocumented in the country. Can you tell us exactly what this might mean? What kind of criminal records are we talking about? Is there a deliberate othering going on within the vast community of undocumented immigrants? And I should mention, I just saw an article which quoted an Irish community advocate saying that the Irish undocumented need not fear deportation because they are not criminals.
Well, we've seen this kind of rhetoric creating a divide between good and bad immigrants in every administration. The numbers that we've heard the president-elect use are subject to a lot of scrutiny. It's not clear when he talks about this number of 3 million individuals who are undocumented and have criminal records, where that number comes from. If you do the breakdown and the analysis, it's not quite clear it's there. That being said, we have always known that people who have criminal records, who have had an interaction with police where they have been arrested, are at particular risk, both in terms of being identified by immigration officials for deportation, as well as being denied immigration benefits if they apply for them, and then being referred for deportation proceedings. So it's a real concern. But the kind of rhetoric that we see potentially being repeated by community advocates, by immigrants who are directly affected, by lawyers along these lines is particularly problematic. Because when you look at individuals who are going to be targeted, potentially, we believe, under the new president-elect's administration, and you look at the individual, this line between good and bad falls apart. I think about one of our clinic's clients, a woman who has lived in this country for over a decade, who came to this country on a visa, overstayed the visa, and was unable to regularize her status because there simply wasn't a path available for her. Yet she had children that she was caring for, and as she struggled in her life here to support those children, made a mistake where she ended up taking some money, hoping that she would be able to pay it back without anyone noticing from her employer, in order to prevent her and her kids from being evicted from their home. This resulted in a conviction for which she was given no jail time. The criminal court recognized that she was in a desperate situation and did not think that it made sense for her and her family for her to be separated from them. Yet we saw that 10 years later, immigration officials came and detained her, held her for many months, and only through the support of the city, through the New York Immigrant Family Unity Project, which does provide representation for detained New Yorkers, was she able to find a lawyer who then connected her with our clinic to represent her and get her out of detention. And so when you talk about these quote unquote bad immigrants, quote unquote criminal aliens, people who are undocumented and have criminal records, I think of this woman who is a mother to an amazing family of U.S. citizen children who, yes, has made a mistake, but has already paid the price through our criminal system, which is broken in and of itself, and then faces a second punishment. And at that point, when we target people who have criminal convictions, we are not solving any crimes, we are only creating new ones. To deport this mother would simply leave her children without a breadwinner, without the person who is providing them with emotional support through their lives. So what does this mean in terms of our reaction today as we hear these policies are potentially going to be expanded? Well, first, for the media, I think it is important that when we start uplifting the voices of people in our community, that we do not repeat that same good versus bad immigrant divide, that we support and uplift the voices of people who are affected regardless of whether or not they may have a past criminal conviction, and recognize that we are doing this in a society where our criminal system is so pervasive that 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record. So there is simply this othering that we see is quite a problem, and we need to profile stories like the story of the woman I described, where people are facing deportation because of a criminal record, but that doesn't mean that deportation is the right thing to do or is in line with American values. For advocates, it means mobilizing resources. There are many organizations throughout the city that have a specialty in understanding whether or not a past criminal conviction or an interaction with the police could put you at particular risk for deportation and detention. Just one of these organizations is the Immigrant Defense Project, which operates a free hotline where anyone can call, can show them and fax them a past criminal record, a police report, a conviction you might have gotten 10, 20, 30 years ago, and let you know whether it is safe for you to apply for an immigration benefit. This problem not only affects people who are undocumented, but many people who have lawful status. We often represent green card holders who do not realize that their conviction makes them at risk for deportation. They apply for citizenship, and then they find themselves being referred for deportation proceedings. So groups like the Immigrant Defense Project can provide free advice to individuals about whether they are at risk. And we also need to make sure that in the plethora of resources that are sent forth to have clinics, to do screenings, that people who have this expertise are part of that conversation, so that we can also consider how we can help people in New York to get pardons for their state convictions, to get post-conviction relief so that they can start to get a clean record and what they need to move forward. And finally, I would just say with the city response, like I said, through the Knife Up program, providing free legal services for people who are detained in New York, in the New York Varick Immigration Court, is an incredible example. We hope that that will be expanded throughout the state and throughout the country through the leadership. But it's also important to note that when we talk about sanctuary cities, and New York is indeed a sanctuary city, that there are some for whom the sanctuary city policies will not fully protect. And that leads us to a conversation about policing. So I'll just end by noting that even though New York has enacted one of the most progressive laws protecting information from the city with being disclosed to ICE, there are policies that are in place by the federal government that fall through the cracks. So if you are arrested and fingerprinted in New York City today, even under these important laws, those fingerprints are automatically shared with the Department of Homeland Security. So despite the fact that there are incredible steps that cities like New York have taken to create a sanctuary safe space, it is not fully safe, and that's why we need to see more reforms to our policing to make sure that people are aware if you're arrested, that is in of itself enough to flag you to immigration, and that our policies are not so protective that they prevent that from happening. That's a federal program. It's something that we're worried will be expanded and really made to be even more difficult for our communities. So hopefully we'll see a change to policing policies. So things that the city has done generally to protect Americans and non-citizens and immigrants from being overly policed, those kinds of policies can be expanded because, again, once you're arrested, a lot of the damage is already done.
Thank you, Alina. I would like to introduce, we were just joined by Jojo Annobil. He last summer became executive director of the Immigrant Justice Corps. He worked previously for 26 years at the Legal Aid Society, where for more than a decade he was the attorney in charge of the Immigration Law Unit. And that unit provided low-income New Yorkers with immigration services ranging from deportation defense to adjustment of status to legal permanent residence and citizenship applications. I'd like to ask you, Jojo, based on your many years of work on behalf of immigrants seeking to establish legal status here, can you tell us about the process of screening immigrants to determine the most appropriate visas and status to seek? What avenues and alternatives are available that may be underutilized at this time, such as T visas or U visas? And give us an overview of the options that may be available in an environment that promises to be chillier.
So I'm sorry for being late, but screening is very important, and what we've realized over the last probably 4 to 5 years is that whenever there are initiatives, we have screened immigrants for other permanent forms of relief, be it TPS for Haitians, TPS for Sierra Leoneans and Gambians, and also even for DACA. But most times what has happened is that we tend to focus on the temporary because that is what the clinic is all about. And also because sometimes we don't have enough resources that even when we screen and figure out that someone is eligible for a permanent form of relief, who is going to help that person pursue that relief, because everybody at that point in time is focused so much on the temporary relief. So I'll give you an example. In 2012, when we were screening DACA applicants, we met a young woman with 2 of her siblings and their mother had come in for DACA screening. In talking to them and going through the screening sheet, we recognized that there was something there in terms of sexual assault, but it wasn't a safe place for her. And so the mother picked up on it and indicated that she wanted the siblings, the male siblings, to step outside so that they could talk to us confidentially. It happened to be that the young woman had been assaulted by a cousin, and this had been reported. That falls under a U visa for victims of crime. Suddenly, this family that's undocumented could possibly, through this young woman, all get status, both the parent and also the 2 siblings. So what we did back in the day was to refer them to another unit in our practice that handled U visas. And so they went from coming in seeking DACA to probably getting permanent forms of relief. And that's what we are talking about. So I think that we have about 2 months during which we need to do very, very serious and in-depth screening of undocumented immigrants, of DACA recipients, of TPS recipients. So last year we did a whole clinic. The city organized a clinic where we saw about 500 people. And we screened some of them, but most of them were undocumented. So for example, when we are screening for these relief options, one of the things that we often fail to ask is not just about the person sitting in front of us, but about family members, because it could be that a mother has been abused, a father has been abused, someone has been trafficked, someone filed an application a long time ago that they've forgotten about it, and through that, the family could benefit. So for example, there was an old law called Section 245I, which allowed anyone who had an application filed, whether it was a family-based application or an employment-based application, anytime between 94 and April of 2001. What it did was that as long as the application was approvable when filed, was properly filed, if you came here without a visa, you could adjust your status here and pay a penalty of $1,000. Now, if you're a principal applicant, you can use 245 adjustment for adjustment purposes multiple times until you are granted adjustment. So let's say you were married back then and the application was denied. You still have the opportunity of using 245I if, let's say, you now have a US citizen child who is petitioning for you, but because you came in without a visa, someone is telling you you can't adjust. Because you had that application back then, you can do that. Or it could be a labor certification filed by an employer. So apart from 245I, and also it applies to qualifying relatives. So if you had a spouse or a child at the time between 94 and 2001, at the time the application was filed, they can independently file to adjust status. Let's say the wife is now divorced from the husband, they could basically be able to do it independently. Then there are all these humanitarian visas that are also available. U visas for crime victims, there are T visas for people who've suffered severe trafficking. And one would have to really tease these things out. What I have always said is that sometimes you're sitting in Far Rockaway and you're doing a screening. You may not be able to do an in-depth screening because you don't have all the knowledge about immigration. But once you get a sense that the person may be eligible for something else, you need to refer that person to another organization that is willing to take that case on. The problem we are having with screening is, or has always been this. So currently, before we had a president-elect and elections, all the legal service providers have ongoing cases. They have clients who need services. Suddenly, we are asking them to pivot and do screening. So they do the screening, and then question comes up, who does the case that you've just identified, that the person is eligible for some form of relief? And so that's an area of need, and we have to really figure out how we do that, because oftentimes what happens is that we recognize that the person has relief available to him, but then we say, well, I don't have capacity to do that. So I send you to B organization. They also say they don't have capacity to do that. And you keep bouncing around, and suddenly you forget about it. But we're in a climate where we cannot forget about it, okay? There are probably about 14 to 15% of the unauthorized, undocumented population who've never spoken to an attorney or an accredited rep. And it's very important that they do so, because you may be eligible for some kind of relief. And it doesn't matter that you've been screened before. Circumstances change. Circumstances change. It could be that you were robbed last week. It could be that you were hit on the head last week. Something may have happened, or you're suddenly married to someone who got injured. And because of that, you suddenly are a derivative. So it's important that as legal service providers, we really do a good job of screening and making sure that we don't also duplicate efforts. It doesn't make sense for you to get screened by provider A, and then 2 days later you go to provider C and go through that same screening. And so in a city that's full of immigrants and full of organizations that can do this work, we need to come up with a structure where once you've been screened, either you are entered into a database or you're given some information that's shared with others so that we don't duplicate these efforts. But all in all, I think we are in an uncertain times. There's a need to screen the DACA folks. There's a need to screen those who have TPS, because even in those areas, if you've traveled on advanced parole outside the country on TPS or DACA and come back into the country, but you originally entered without inspection and suddenly have a spouse who is a US citizen, you can adjust your status. So these are things that we are working on, and it's a matter of education, one, and two, screening properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jojo. I think you've raised a question when you talk about capacity that it can be a really big issue now. The governor said that, you know, there would be a new public-private partnership at the state level to provide immigration, legal immigration services. There are so many efforts around, but realistically, what is there some coordination like you're speaking of going on or about to happen? And what resources can we expect to have devoted to both the screening and the actual, taking on of cases in coming months?
I think right now what we're doing is more of, as legal service providers and organizations working with immigrants, it always surprises me how we rise to the occasion, whether we have funding or we don't have funding, because this work is so important to us, and we have staff who are so passionate about this that we come together when these things happen, but ultimately pay the price, because when we do so, that means overworking our staff or not being able to take on other cases that are worth taking on. So I think that, probably this is an opportunity, an opportune time to, for once, come together and figure out that what resources do we need, right, to do this work? Do we need to hire more staff? Do we need to be able to do screening that we share the information amongst ourselves so that we don't duplicate those efforts? But I think that the city has done an amazing job in terms of funding legal services for immigration. And I believe that sometimes what ultimately happens is that because they've put out so much money, they sometimes want us to pivot and do other things. But in doing that, again, I don't want to rehash this. the cases we've taken on suffer. So I think instead of doing that, there's a need to inject a little bit more money into this process, at least in the short term, until we know for certain, because we don't know. It's very possible, for example, that come January, another 2 million people could be placed in proceedings. In New York alone, we have a backlog of 70,000 cases, okay, where we can't even take on some of those cases that are there. There's not enough money for representation. So we welcome the governor's yesterday's statement that he's going to set up a legal defense fund. We would want to see how that fund looks like and who it funds, and make sure that it reaches the people who need these resources and the organizations who do this kind of work and can do it very well.
Nisha, is there any consideration at the city level to somehow move more strongly to coordinate these efforts, or to introduce some kind of universal screening, as Jojo suggests, or something that would expedite and smooth the process?
Sure. So, I mean, I think some of the things we've already done, the program that was mentioned, Action NYC, is a community-based legal services program. And the way that program was developed was explicitly through conversation with community-based organizations, with legal services providers, to understand how do we create a more coordinated system that not only leverages the legal resources that the city has, but also the community-based organizations, many of whom can do the navigation, can even become the accredited reps that then expand the pool of resources that are available. So through Action NYC, we've been doing a lot of that sort of coordination work, or starting to think about that coordination. And we are now in the process of talking with all of the Action NYC legal services providers to understand, what are you seeing in the field? What do you anticipate the needs will be in the future, so that if the program needs to adapt to a changed future, we can do that. The other piece that I would sort of add to all of this is that there's coordination across different sort of city funding streams. So in addition to Action NYC, there's the Immigrant Opportunities Initiative. There's been a lot more coordination and sort of strategic planning across the city about the immigration legal resources, so they start to connect better to one another, and that's work that we'll continue to do, always in collaboration with partners. The city has currently invested tens of millions of dollars in immigration legal services, and this morning the mayor made clear that we would build on the work, and want to acknowledge the work that the city council has really done as well in investing in these programs. It's needed to be able to build on that, to expand access to counsel for immigrants, particularly in the deportation context. And so, it's something we've been emphatically committed to, both on investing in these programs, but also in providing the coordination. Coordinating with a lot of different providers ain't easy, but we will continue to do that as we're moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I could ask whoever on the panel would like to step in on this. Let's say those of you who are providing services now, get a panicky call from somebody who is undocumented and wants to know how to prepare, what to do. What are the three key pieces of advice you would tell them right now?
Well, I mean, the first thing that we would say is to speak with a lawyer who you can develop that relationship with, who will start to work with you to collect documentation. And that's why this coordination that's been discussed is so important, so we can make sure people are actually connected to legal services. But we also don't want people to feel like there's nothing they can do on their own without a lawyer, so it's very important for people to start collecting their own documents, to make a safety plan, which involves really collecting information that you may have if you have had immigration status in the past, to collect those old documents. If you do have some interaction with the criminal system at one point, to collect those documents and really have them all in one place, because often you will be asked by a lawyer, if you are able to meet with one, about your history, about family members. This includes birth certificates of your children, making a plan for your children if, God forbid, you are arrested by immigration officials. And then the third point would really be to get an understanding of your rights. There's materials here, I know, Karen, that you made available from the National Lawyers Guild. for people to know what to do, that if they do interact with immigration officials at some point in time, essentially to not say anything, not sign anything, to never lie, and just to assert your ability to get an attorney. In case it hasn't been made clear, one of the most devastating features of our immigration detention and deportation system is that there is no recognized right to counsel. So the government is not going to provide people with attorneys unless you are lucky enough to live in a city like New York City, where the city council and the mayor's office have stepped up to provide that in some cases. So that is a real difficulty for folks, and it's important for people to know that if they're picked up, that they do need to secure themselves, and hopefully have had a family member who now has their documents, information about them, who can act as that resource if they haven't had an opportunity to meet with a lawyer already.
And Alina, if I may add, I think one of the other things I always tell clients is, even if you don't come back to see me, make sure that you are reaching out to a reputable provider, and that you do not give anyone your documents, because it's very important. Sometimes that's what scammers and unscrupulous lawyers do. They take your papers from you, and so you're beholden to them. Do not give anyone your documents. Make sure you keep your documents, and don't sign anything if you don't know what you're signing. Those are important things, because I think a lot of times our clients get caught up in that because someone in their community speaks the same language, and they feel that they are much more comfortable with that person than coming down to your office to talk to someone that they don't know. So that's another piece I'll just add.
Yeah, and your original document should always stay with you and a trusted family member, and you can provide copies of the information to a lawyer.
Camille?
Yeah, I just want to say the Protecting Immigrant New Yorkers Task Force, which is government, law enforcement, and community organizations that work on immigration services fraud issues, and will probably be broadening its scope a little bit given the results of the election. They have a website, Protecting Immigrants. We have a website, protectingimmigrants.org, where you can download a lot of flyers and information. We just launched a series of comics that sort of warn people of scams, but all that information that Alina and Jojo just gave is on there. And you can also call the New York State Office for New American hotline at, I'll repeat the number, but it's 1-800-566-7636. That's 1-800-566-7636. The Office for New American hotline, the New York State New American hotline, they'll give you a free referral. Yeah, I will at the end. There you go. They'll give you a free referral to legal service providers. They'll take a complaint if you've been a victim of a scam. They'll actually transfer you to the Action NYC appointment line if you're in New York City and you want an appointment with them. So they're a pretty good resource as well. But you should definitely always have, and I say this not just on behalf of the NYC, but having been an attorney who represented immigrants who were detained, like, it's really helpful to have a copy of all of your papers somewhere so that your family members can find them fast and know, and they're going to be really panicked, so have a number that they can call right away, and try to find legal help and find someone to talk to and bring those documents to the lawyer.
And that legal referral, that legal provider referral service is essentially a clearinghouse that can guarantee that whoever is on that list is, in fact,
Yes.
reputable. Okay, good. And just one more question for Nisha. IDNYC has collected a lot of information about undocumented in the city, and the mayor suggested that if need be, the city would not provide that data, would destroy it. Can you just bring us a little up to date on that, or clarify the position on that
Sure, I can give a little bit
data?
more background on that. So, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that we have more than 900,000 New Yorkers who signed up for the card, so it's gone well beyond serving the undocumented. It's really a card for all New Yorkers. And in the local law that was passed, by the end of the year, we are required to make a determination about document retention. And that's something that we're committed to doing really from the beginning of the program. The privacy and confidentiality of applicants' information has been a priority HRA is the agency that administers the program, and the commissioner of HRA issued a number of different executive orders protecting people's information. And so that same philosophy will definitely carry forward, and we're sort of required by law to look into that by the end of the year. This was well before this presidential election.
So will we hear an announcement at the end of the year as to what decision has been
We will
made?
definitely make our decision public.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to open it up to questions now from the audience. Yes, Abu. Okay.
My name is Abu Tahir. I'm from Time Television and Bangla Patrika. My question is, since the election, the racial attack, the hate crime, it's more than ever. So far, we remember last 25 years. Everybody thought might be New York City mayor, Immigration Affairs Office, they will go through to the community and say, you know, what they're supposed to do if anything happen. But since then, we don't see any activities of the New York City mayor, Immigration Affairs Office. Could you please tell us about your
Sure.
program?
So we, just as recently as this morning, the mayor announced very clearly in his public address that individuals who are sort of experiencing or witnessing active violence, hate crimes should call NYPD. And there's also the City Commission on Human Rights has a hotline to file complaints around bias and discrimination. That information is on this one pager as well. And we have had our staff and certainly city agencies pushing this message out as well through a variety of different channels, encouraging people to step forward, share their complaints, take advantage of the resources that the city provides if they find themselves in situations around bias, discrimination, and harassment, which we know there has been an uptick. And the police commissioner has also been very public in saying that we recognize that there is this uptick and that the city, including the NYPD, is working on these issues.
Other questions? Okay, Soyoung.
Hi, Soyoung from the Korea Times. What could be the practical advice to someone who has to renew DACA? Let's say he has a work permit through DACA a few years ago and he has to renew, otherwise he will lose his job. But like Ms. Newman mentioned, like nothing is predictable, and he might fear like it might be his information might be sent to the new president administration, and so he, probably are stating to renew that. And what could be, like, what could you say to that person?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, as I had mentioned, renewing is not going to put him more at risk than the initial registration. So in that sense, I don't think that there's a reason not to legally. However, as a practical matter, since we don't know if the program will last beyond the end of January, I think he'd have to make a calculation in his mind. Is it worth paying? Is he using the work authorization currently, or perhaps he's just studying right now? I don't know the situation. If he's going to lose his job because he doesn't have it, then it would lean towards, yes, it would be a good idea to renew it. If not, maybe somebody wants to wait and see what happens in January before they spend the money to renew the program. So it's a practical matter. But I think, as we said, as a risk, someone's assessing risk, I don't think that renewing in the program is going to put him at any more risk.
Do you think it's better to wait until January, like something gets more clear? Is that?
I think it depends on the person, because there are some people for whom an expired work authorization is going to mean you lose your job. So I think that's a very individualized question.
Jojo, do you have
Well,
do you
I
agree
think
with that?
you have between 120 and 150 days before it expires for you to renew the card. I think if you don't have a criminal conviction, you've already provided information on the DACA application and also on the employment authorization document. You've already provided information. So I don't think you're really at risk. I think the issue is whether, for example, the fees are going up. As of December 23rd, all application fees are going up. And so is it that you don't want to pay the fee because you don't know what may happen? But I also want to make sure that folks understand that one of the things that we need to be very, very careful about is we need to calm immigrants down. You know, there's so much fear, there's so much anxiety. We need to calm people down. The DACA program has what came about because there's been a lot of fight about undocumented population. The DACA population has been the most compelling because they are children who came here without being able to say, yes, I want to go, or no, I don't want to go. And so we started off with a DREAM Act. It passed in the House. It didn't happen in the Senate. But they've been the most compelling of the undocumented population. And I think that at this stage, it will, I just don't see how anyone who is humane and who is thinking of making sure that our immigration laws work would go back and undo the DACA program. These are folks who've been taken through checks, criminal background checks, probably once, probably twice, and it's come out that they are clean, if I can use that word. And so they are here, they are contributing towards their community. Some of them are actually driving their parents because their parents are undocumented and don't want to risk driving them to work. Some of them are contributing to their communities. Teach for America has about 146 DACA recipients working as teachers. Can you imagine what it would look like next semester if 146 teachers can't show up for work because suddenly DACA is revoked? You know, let's think about it. And I think we all need to support some of these programs and need to have our voices heard. That's a start. That's a start towards repairing our broken immigration laws. These are people who are in schools, who are in training programs, who suddenly have jobs. And I don't think it makes sense to send 800,000 young people scrambling to figure out what is the next move. That's not right. And I think we have to stand up for that, and we have to fight for that.
Thank you. Camille, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on something Jojo said about calming immigrant communities down. It's one thing to say you're going to end DACA. It's another thing to find the staff to stuff 750,000 envelopes and let them know that their work permit is now expired. You know, you need to give notice to people. It's one thing to say you're going to deport 2 million individuals. It's another to actually put them through immigration courts, which as Jojo pointed out earlier, right now in New York, it's a 2 to 3 year process minimum. I mean, they can say what they want to do and they can say what they think certain people want to hear, but to actually do it, and then there's the rest of the country to govern, right? There's not just immigration issues to deal with. I think that there's going to be legal challenges every step of the way. The ACLU's already made that commitment. There's just, it's not going to happen overnight, and I don't want to downplay the fears because I understand them and they're very real, and I certainly don't want to act like this is, you know, a continuation of the last 8 years, or that we're going towards more progressive policies. We're clearly not. But I mean, to say that you're going to do one thing and to actually do it are two very different things. And everyone knows that in immigration, you deal with what's in front of you in that moment. So he's saying he's going to do, the president-elect, his administration, they're saying they're going to do a lot of things starting on January 21st. Let's actually see what happens. I think, you know, it's scary, but we do have to wait and see.
Okay, thank you. Yes. You had a question a while ago.
Hi. My name is Kaushik Ahmed. I publish a weekly Bengali newspaper for Bangladesh community. My question is to Nisha Agarwal. We got this information from this flyer that you mentioned, ID NYC doesn't collect immigration status information. So why the question has been raised for destroying the information collected or handing over to the federal agents?
So the question that's come up is really about, as I'd mentioned, sort of part of the existing local law is just reviewing whether ongoing document retention should happen. And as Camille mentioned, you know, we don't know what the future will hold until it actually happens. And so we are doing an analysis to understand sort of what we would do with ongoing with documents in the future, based on whatever limited knowledge we have about what might happen in the future. And so far, you know, we've been able to keep people's information private and confidential under the law, and we'll continue to do that. So I think that's really the issue, but you may raise a very good point. When you go to apply for an ID card, nobody asks you what your immigration status is. There's no way to know what a person's immigration status is based on their ID card. And so hopefully that makes it not a very viable target for those who may be interested in the names of New Yorkers, but we will, you know, we'll be thoughtful about that as we make our decisions.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Claudine. I am a self-publisher for The Power of Social Media. I use social media a lot, and then I'm from Rwanda, survived the genocide over there. I am with Africa Vision Nouvelle TV to come to cover this program to see how we can educate our people in the community, Africans and other people in diaspora. The question I have to you is, what other methodology in you call us to come here to cover this program, like as a journalist, as media? What other strategy you use to reach out to people in the community, and then they can know your wonderful program you are doing? Another, people are traumatized. I graduated in trauma studies at NYU. We understand the impact of trauma. When people are traumatized, I hear you are telling that people should come forward to you. Believe me, when you are traumatized, you don't even wake up in the morning. You don't even want to go outside. So how really are you going to help people to come down? You're talking about immigration coming down. How are you going to help people to feel release, to understand that in New York City, yes, Mayor already said he will destroy information, even if immigration law enforcers come to him to take information of those people who are undocumented. If it's necessary, I saw that on TV, if it's necessary, he will destroy that. So how can you take this information to the people in our communities for them to feel safe, at least to be here in the Big Apple in New York City? So language is a barrier. We are speaking English, but some immigrants don't speak English. Are you thinking about translating all your information in the local languages? I mean, in New York City, people who speak different languages. Thank you.
Nisha, you want to take that, or?
So just to your community outreach point, first of all, something like this, a panel like this is really critical because you're all voices for your communities, and you have the trust of your community, so you can bring that information back. At the New York Immigration Coalition, with the city, we've done a lot of different. We started a lot of different programs to try to get into the heart of the communities. We have a Key to the City event series, which goes into public schools for 3 days at a time, working with local organizations and trying to bring people into trusted spaces. Schools, we do them all in public schools, so bring them into trusted spaces. There's Action NYC, which are also paired with community-based organizations to sort of, to build on that trust that the organizations have within their communities. We have, you were talking about the African community. There's been a new initiative launched called the Black Immigrant Engagement Initiative. The NYC is a part of it, Baji is a part of it, African Communities Together are a part of it, Kamba and some other groups specifically to target the needs of those immigrant communities. We have others that try to serve. We have an Asian Pacific Islander table to serve those needs. Like, we try to go really at the community level to try to get and speak those languages. And obviously, in New York of all places, right, which has so much more diversity than really anywhere else in the country. We're very, very aware of that, and we just have to get the message out and rely on individuals like you to help us get that message as far as possible. I mean, I know the city has made investments in public transit campaign ads because we all take the train. To the question of trauma, that's an excellent question, and the mental health needs of immigrant communities is something that we've all thought about a lot. I don't know if Commissioner Agarwal, if you want to speak to that. We're starting to make inroads. We're also understanding there's an issue and that there's a lot of more work to do, at least on our part.
Yeah, so just adding a few things to what Camille said. So first, this fact sheet we are translating as we speak so that we can get the information to communities in the languages that they understand. Our office, but also agencies across city government, have outreach teams that are multilingual and very much are on the ground, as Camille mentioned, working with partners and community organizations to do more grassroots workshops to get this information out there. And I will just say, for all of the programs that we have worked on in the last couple of years, the single best way to get information out to the community we have found has been all of you. So community and ethnic media, we have seen huge upticks in demand for a range of different services, getting messages out. So forums like this are invaluable. And then finally, on the trauma issue, the First Lady of New York City has taken this issue of mental health very, very seriously. And one of the things we just recently started pushing out was reminding New Yorkers about New York City Well, which is a hotline that you can call, more than 200 languages, to be able to call if you are feeling trauma, if you are in a moment of crisis and need to reach out. And the easiest thing to do would be to pick up the phone and make that phone call. And we've really been trying to get that information out to immigrant communities so that they know that resource is available as well. And from New York City Well, you can connect to a range of other resources that may be available, critically important in this moment.
Javier?
Yes, it's on. Yeah, my name is Javier Castaño from Queens Latino. I have many questions, but let's start with the first one to Alizabeth Newman. Are we scaring people? Immigrants out there, they don't have a lot of information and they are scared, especially after hearing that President-elect Donald Trump is going to deport from 2 to 3 million people undocumented. That's less than Obama, to tell you the truth. So are we scaring this? And the second question is about, I don't know if you are somebody's an expert in technology and homeland security, but we put a lot of attention of the DACA applicants and all that. But when all these immigrants in the city of New York, in the big cities and small cities too, they open an email account, they use the Wi-Fi in the train stations. All this information is out there. Even when you use social media and it's your birthday, they come out with all this information to celebrate your birthday. So they have all the information, the names and everything. I don't know if you are an expert in what's going on out there.
So I'm not exactly sure what the question was directed to me, but I will say on your comment, I think, yes, it is a scary time for immigrants in the country. And I think that maybe the message that the panel that we agree on is that people shouldn't panic, and we really do need to wait and see, because candidate Trump made a lot of statements and definitely wanted to send a message of this is a country of laws and enforcement must be back in place, et cetera. And that left a lot of fear about how that might be implemented and what that might mean for immigrant communities. But there's as a practical matter, what can really be done and what really will be done. I think we've already started to see some change after the election in the practicalities of, well, how is this going to implement? Everything from, you're right, building the wall around the entire border came to, well, maybe a fence here and there, when the realities of what it would cost and how long it would take, et cetera. So I think we need to wait and see. And I think we need to take advantage of the wonderful opportunities that the city is making available for people who are concerned to come and get some very specific legal counsel that is, particular to their family and, what options that they might be able to take. But we need to continue to move forward. And, I would say in immigration law in the background, I've been doing this for decades, as many of us, that the more time somebody has in this country where they're working, that they are on the books, that they're doing the right thing, that usually means something. If they're at a point later where they have to be in front of a judge, sometimes that in and of itself, just staying as a contributing person in their communities makes a difference. So people can't stop living and should not stop living. And I guess that's what I would say to the point. I don't know if anybody else wants to add.
Well, I think I've heard two comments so far. One about it's easy to say don't get scared. I understand that, right? It's not easy to reach out to someone who is saying, I don't know if I should go to work because I don't know if someone is going to pick me up. But that is the atmosphere people are trying to create, and that's what we are trying to say. We shouldn't create that. You are in a city that has always been welcoming. You're in a welcoming city, a city of immigrants. And the city has put out, I hate to keep repeating this, the city has put out a lot of resources in order to protect immigrants. In today's city, if you are detained, if the federal government detains you for removal, the city will provide you with a lawyer, and I mean an ethical, competent lawyer to represent you. That wasn't the case 4 years ago. If we're talking about this same situation 4 or 5 years ago, I know it's a bit dire than it is today. When you look at everything that's happening, so there have been changes from the campaign scene to today. You heard about NAFTA. I'm going to get rid of NAFTA. Suddenly it's like there are certain portions of NAFTA that we can renegotiate. The same thing with removal. You're going to remove 2 to 3 million people who have criminal convictions. The question is over what period of time? Congress has appropriated money to remove at least 400,000 immigrants a year. So is there the money to do that? And how are you going to do that, placing a lot of these people in removal proceedings in a system that is overwhelmed? They're dealing with children coming out of Central America. They're dealing with adults with children coming out of Central America. They can't even handle that kind of load or caseload. So when we say, let's calm down, we are talking from experience and knowing the systems in place, which unfortunately the immigrant on the ground doesn't know, and that is why we're here. That is why we're here to disseminate that information. The organization I work for, Immigrant Justice Corps, we have fellows, recent college graduates, recent law school graduates who are so passionate about immigration law, and we've placed them in organizations that are underserved. We have them in African communities. We are working with Sauti Yetu. We are in the Arab community with the Arab American Association of New York City. We are working with Menkwan, which caters to Koreans. Mm-hmm. So we have people in the field who are working to calm these fears. And all we are saying is that reach out to those organizations, the community-based organizations, and they will be able to help you or give you more information. Because that is what you need. You need information, and you need accurate information. Because once you give someone accurate information, one person, this is how information travels. That person goes back home and tells his or her spouse, and that person also turns that information. The moment the information is inaccurate, that is when you cause trouble, because then someone's going to say, oh, they said you shouldn't even come out of your house. Why shouldn't you come out of your house? Okay, if you look at the national statistics, and that's what Ms. Newman was talking about, 1.9 million of the undocumented population have lived in this country for 20 years or more. 6.6 have lived in this country for at least 10 years or more. People are enmeshed in the system. You know, the mayor, our former mayor Bloomberg once said that, yes, people came here illegally. When they got here, employers also hired them even though they were not supposed to. But if they hadn't, the economy in New York City wouldn't move. It wouldn't be what it is. And if you take those people out of the system, the economy will break down. Mm-hmm. And so my thing is that there's so many moving parts, and all we're saying is that within the next 2 months, we are going to help immigrants understand their rights. We are going to screen them. We're going to figure out with them where we go from here. The ultimate goal is to fix the broken immigration laws. That is the ultimate goal. That is the root cause of where we are now. And we have to keep our eyes on that prize.
Thank you, Jojo. That's very well put. Nisha, I understand you have to leave, and I don't know, perhaps another. Yeah, I don't know if she has time. It's really up to her.
Maybe you could connect with my colleague Vita, and I'm happy to do interviews afterwards.
Not interview, just a question, just a few seconds.
I think we have to.
I remember after 9/11, I mean, there's all you 5 people giving a very kind word for all the community. But practically after 9/11, we saw the people, how they get arrested. Just a simple question to you and Mr. Jojo. How about somebody, FBI and Homeland Security and immigration people, if they arrested somebody, what is the next step that the person should do?
If someone is arrested, what is the...
For expiring the cards or, you know.
I think maybe responding to your question about 9/11, here's what I would say is that after 9/11, one of the problems in the community, right, was things like special registration. And similar sorts of registries have been discussed. We'll see what happens with the new administration. But as of this morning, as the mayor was very clear, that if a similar kind of registry is created, we will use what tools we have at our disposal, being able to fight back legally, for example, on those kinds of things, to try to resolve the problem. So I think there's a huge amount of commitment, and if the last 2.5 years have been any indication, it's not just commitment of words, but also actions and real investments in the immigrant community. So I don't think that's going to change from this administration either.
Thank you so much,
I
Nisha.
just want to
No.
say congratulations for this translation. It's a wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, Jahangir, we have the mic, please. Thank you. Do you need to leave
Hi,
as well?
I'm Bill
Okay,
McGowan.
let's just hold it one moment because somebody else might have to leave. Anybody else who has to leave now? Okay, thanks, Camille. Thank you so much. Okay.
I'm Bill
Yes.
McGowan. I'm a journalist and an author. I also run a blog called Coloring the News, and just wanted to thank you for this. I basically just walked in off the street earlier. But I have a brother who's an immigration lawyer in Portland, Oregon, and we were talking about this, and maybe you can help me a little bit. I'm not terribly familiar with the nuts and bolts of the deportation proceeding, the legal proceeding. How much now does the government try to use future admissibility of the undocumented who's going to be deported? How much does the government try to use that as a way to get basically a kind of plea bargain for the immigrant to leave without prejudice, so to speak? And how much do you assess that changing? I mean, might the government go into, if they do, I mean, I know we're all peering into a dark room. How much might the government use that as a bargaining chip to get somebody out and to forestall lengthy and expensive procedures with the idea that they'll at least be able to get in at a future date? There won't be prejudice, assigned or attached to staying. Do you have any idea?
So, so in terms of immigration law, it's all incredibly complicated. There are some programs that, if you qualify, which is a very narrow group of people who may be placed in deportation proceedings now, a small category of those folks might be able to do something called voluntary departure through the system, which may preserve their ability to come back sooner than they would if they had a deportation order. It's hard to know whether that's going to play a big role in an expanded deportation system because so few people are eligible for that to begin with. The other big concern that people have been hearing about is the fact that there has been an uptick in the use of prosecutorial discretion under the Obama administration, even though he has by far deported more people than any other administration or all the administrations combined during his presidency. He's also started to slowly implement procedures for people to have their cases closed, to not have that not have to go through the full process. That may change dramatically, but again, we have to see how that's being used and who's going to feel pressured to sign. Detention is a huge problem. Detention has also skyrocketed under the current administration. We expect it to expand under the new administration. Detention is one of the most coercive aspects of the system, and many people sign out because they want to escape detention and then may face bars to returning to the United States because of that. So I think that will continue to be a significant problem and that we'll all be vigilant about.
Okay, we have another question there.
Yeah, hello, I'm Vivian Lee, a reporter with Newtown Dynasty, the Chinese TV network based in New York. And I want to ask Jojo, could you talk about a little bit more about the legal defense fund by Truman?
So, in terms of the governor's Immigrant Legal Defense Fund, all we know is that the governor announced that he's going to establish that fund with both government and private funding. We don't have a lot of information on it, but we are hoping that that funding would go to help both immigrants seeking benefits and also immigrants who are challenging removal or deportation.
And besides this, is there any other resources are be sure for protecting the immigration community?
I believe the city has put in a lot of resources in terms of providing representation to immigrants who are detained and facing deportation. There are 3 organizations, Legal Aid Society, Bronx Defenders, and Brooklyn Defender Services, who provide representation to anyone who is detained and cannot afford a lawyer and fits within a certain income guideline. That person automatically gets a lawyer, and that lawyer would represent the person all throughout the proceedings.
We have a question up front here.
Hi, good evening. My name is Camille Montañez. I'm a student here from the Graduate School of Journalism. Thank you for coming. You say that we immigrants need to calm down because everything that Trump is saying, it might happen, it might not happen, but I think we need to be prepared. So for the people, the dreamers, a lot of them, they have jobs, a lot of them go to school, a lot of them, they're involved in college. What do you have to tell them to be prepared if Trump's administration decides to remove DACA?
I would say that for individuals who have DACA right now, they should, again, and I agree that, you know, we need to be careful about what we're trying, decisions that we make based on predictions, because it's very hard to know. But rather than saying people shouldn't be afraid, I would just say people should turn their fear into action as a motivator to get involved, to make sure they understand their own case, and to meet with lawyers now. But people who have DACA may have some options available to them that other individuals do not. One issue has to do with advanced parole. There's a program, it's only available in very, very limited circumstances, but it could help someone who may have a problem with getting a green card through the normal adjustment process now to be able to get a green card through that process. Now, again, we know it's very limited. For most people, it might not be an available solution, but you don't want to look back in a couple of months and say, hey, maybe I had an opportunity to explore my options and now that's gone. So I would, again, encourage people to take their fear and the uncertainty and to motivate them to then reach out to legal service providers that are trusted, that are reliable, and get screened. And if anyone promises you that there is a perfect solution, that's probably a good sign that they're a fraudulent attorney or not an attorney at all. These are all very complicated. But if you go to someone and you sit down and you talk through your specifics of your case, there may be something that you can do now to help secure your ability to stay here, even if DACA is rescinded.
And I also think that, just to add to what Alina said, turning our fears and anxiety into action, what can we do to change the rhetoric? What can we do to change the messaging, you know? And I think that if you have DACA, there are lots of groups out there, Dreamers and other groups, and I think I would encourage anyone who has DACA to join any of those groups because they are organizing on doing different things. It's better to be part of those groups because there's something that goes with community and that goes with being part of something. And I think it's important because then when we are talking about organizing, it could not just organizing about you telling us how great a student you are, but what you mean to this country as well. Because you have stories about people who came here in the arms of their parents and have lived here and are as Brooklyn as they come. You know, it's not like you can send them to back to the Caribbean and suddenly they become Caribbean. You know, they are Americans. You know, these are people. Some of them want to fight in the army. They want to die for this country. You know, and I think there's a need for them to be able to get together and organize and tell some of these stories and pitch some of these, find different ways of organizing to basically be able to show why the program is so important and why we need to do something to put them on a path to lawful status, not a path to citizenship. That is usually what gets us all into trouble. You have to get lawful status first before you become a citizen. So it's about getting them on a path to lawful status.
Okay, thank you so much to our panelists. It's been really informative, and thank you everyone who's still here so much.
You know, I wanted to tell you there's one program too So I'm with CUNY Law School, and there's a program, thank you, that with the raids or with other situations when people have been approached by an FBI, they'll actually counsel somebody and accompany them if they choose to do that, but they'll help somebody who's been approached make a decision whether or not they have to do not have all of that information.
I think there are
and
some
would
concerns
actually
about the
represent
vast
them
amount of information
if they
that the
choose to do that.
NJA has been collecting, that they haven't necessarily made internal immigration issues a priority. So if that were to change, it would be very worrisome, because they're the ones who do more of the monitoring in terms of cell phone communications and getting information from phone companies. And so, immigration hasn't been, internal immigration hasn't been the main, like the kind of the typical issues of people coming unauthorized. But I do.
If you see the CARE website, clearly they give a very strong indication, very strong
Yeah, no, it's different companies have different relationships with the government in terms of how willing they are to share information. So, and like if you, for example, phone companies, they will easily hand over phone records to the government, no questions asked usually. Facebook can be sometimes more protective, so it depends, like if you have a private Facebook messaging system, that they may fight a little bit harder before they turn over that information. People these days are using WhatsApp to call people and to text message. WhatsApp is supposed to be a safer program than say using AT&T or something to make phone calls or text messages. Now, this is an area where I personally, my eyes have been open to
lawyers
this area
available,
more
you've got nothing to
recently. I haven't thought
But
as
I
much
think
about
that
the way our information is
not
shared,
keeping a doubt
and I think a lot of people are starting to
going
wake
to
up.
really find out what paths are available, how can you protect yourself, and is there something you could be doing to better your situation?
Between government agencies and
But I'm a
between
lawyer, so-
the company, the companies that you turn over your information to. And yeah, but then it's also, so people can take simple steps to be protective, like to put passwords on things to make sure that their information is, if they have a computer that is stored locally and that kind of thing, then they can use companies that might be a little bit, that will put up a fight if the government suddenly says, well, we're going to ask for all of the records you have. So people who are concerned about that can take those kinds of steps, but for me personally,